in so many ways, we can't be more of one thing without being less of another. The ability to recognize that I can't be everything and that there are trade-offs for the best things that I bring to the table is really what the strengths-based perspective is all about.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast. I am one of your hosts, and the one that you have today, Ethan Nash. And I am excited to bring back Andy Thompson to the podcast. Andy is probably one of our most frequent flyers on this podcast. So, Andy, welcome back.
Thanks, Ethan. It's good to be here. You sounded a little Batman-like, something about like, not the hero Gotham deserves, I'm just the hero that Gotham has. Didn't he say something like that?
Yeah, I that's actually what I was trying to say. It just came out a little bit differently. So
You're like, I'm the host you have. Deal with it.
I'm the host you have. I might not be the host you need or want, but I'm the host you have today. But luckily, you're here as well, Andy, so you can fill in for some of my weaknesses with some of your strengths, perhaps. But Andy, first off, I just want to let our listeners know a little bit more about you. So Andy, he is one of our colleagues at Nash Consulting. He's someone that is excellent at what he does. And so we are really just always pleased to be able to partner with him at Nash Consulting. And because he's a ambitious person, he also has his own business, his own consulting firm. So, Andy, I'll stop talking for you, and why don't you just maybe share a little bit about yourself, what you do, maybe a bit about your business as well.
Sure. So Andy, we've covered that. My background is actually marriage and family therapy. Before I got into the consulting world, I think I've been in the leadership and organizational development stuff for 8 years now. But going back, I think back on it, and I've thought about this often. I don't think I would change my educational background if I could go and do it over again, for the work I'm doing now. Human systems are human systems, and the family therapy background is all about human systems, and it's been super useful. So that's some of my background. I'm not currently doing any therapy, but still have that license. My own consulting practice is a lot of similar stuff. I focus a lot on the emotional intelligence component, and dig pretty deep into that with my approach to leadership development and personal growth and so on. So there's a little bit of context for what kind of someone I am.
Yeah. And I'll fill in the gap for you, just kind of all around rad guy. Andy's taught me to fish, at least better. He's taught me how to gut a fish, which was not an enjoyable experience. So I'll leave that up to you next time, Andy. But yeah, Andy, glad to have you back on the show and to bring some more of your insights. Before we got recording today, we were having a conversation before the conversation, just a bit about kind of marketing and branding and how you can't really, target everybody and everything at once. So maybe pick up the thread there. What were we talking about there?
Yeah, it's something I've realized, or some connections I've made over the last couple of years, is that years and years ago, other worlds in business figured out that you can't be everything to everybody all of the time. Like you were saying, marketing and branding, there's a phrase that if you're talking to everybody, you're talking to nobody. That's, almost that is one of the most common things that you hear in that world. In the world of business strategy, Michael Porter talks a lot about the idea of trade-offs and how you can't please everyone. Your business can't be for everyone all of the time. And so what you're really choosing is, which things are we going to focus on? Which things are we going to bet on? And for example, this one's in the news recently. Southwest Airlines has always been a classic business strategy case study, and their lack of assigned seating for years. There was a trade-off there. right? They were trading assigned seating for some outputs that gave them some competitive advantage. And they've reevaluated that trade-off. And I guess they're doing away with their old model. And it's because it's all about trade-offs. But again, business strategists have understood that for years. Marketing and advertising folks have understood that for years. But when it comes to people and personal and professional growth, when it comes to management and leadership, we've sort of lagged on the idea that trade-offs also exist for human beings, that each individual can't be all of the good things at once. You can't have all the good traits. You can't be both introverted and extroverted at the same time in the same moment. In so many ways, we can't be more of one thing without being less of another. And that's really what the strengths-based perspective is all about, is the ability to recognize that I can't be everything and that there are trade-offs for the best things that I bring to the table, and learning how to lean into those things, your best work, and to navigate the weaknesses that inevitably accompany those things, is really what, again, the strengths-based perspective is all about.
Yeah, good. And that's what we want to focus on today is the strength-based perspective. Specifically, in the workplace, but of course this applies, outside of the workplace as well. So maybe let me start basic here, or at least basic for me. What is a strength? Because I know you've done a lot of work around this. You talk a lot about the strengths-based perspective. How do you kind of think about a strength, define a strength? Is it, all the accumulation of the knowledge that I've gained over time? Like what is it?
Yeah, there's so to really understand what a strength is, I think it helps to look at the ingredients and get a few definitions out on the table. A strength is, I would say, a combination of four things. It's a combination of talent, which talent is the innate abilities that we have. It's those personality traits that get set in us really early in life. And the key to understanding talents is that talents are not acquired. They're things that just are things about us. And we can dig into examples of that in a little bit. The second ingredient would be skills. Skills are, unlike talents, skills are things that can be acquired. Skills essentially are just a set of steps that you follow to do a particular task or do a particular thing. So, for example, listening is a skill. Anybody can learn the steps of being a great listener, but how your listening shows up might be informed by your talents. If you have a talent for positivity, then your listening might be characterized by encouragement. If you have a talent for empathy, then your listening might be characterized by that empathy. Someone feeling that empathy in that conversation. If your talent is maybe strategic thinking, then when you listen, you might be really, really good at understanding the root causes of why someone's feeling the way that they're feeling and leave them feeling really deeply understood. And so the listening is the skill, it's the set of steps, but the quality of the listening might be informed by your talents. So then the third thing would be knowledge. Knowledge, again, is acquired. It's just information. It's your expertise, the things that you know. And then finally, the important one is context. We have to be in the right context for all of those things to show up in unison, the talents, the skills, and the knowledge to be applicable. So those are the four things that I say really make up a strength. And the talent being kind of the outlier in the sense that it's not acquired or really changeable. It's just that stuff that we really bring to the table. And then we develop that strength by focusing on skills, knowledge, and the appropriate context to really develop and flesh out what that strength is.
Okay. So if I have this right, once again, your strength is going to be something that's already kind of innate, for lack of a better word, innate about you, right? Something that you just kind of
Yes.
naturally do, a
Well, the
pattern of
talent part of it, yeah.
the talent. Yes, thank you. it's kind of just a natural pattern of thought, pattern of behavior, way that you might look at the world, things that might kind of just generally draw your attention and interest could form up that innate talent. And then once you take that talent and you start to develop some skills around that, right? Some actual steps that you might take for that talent to manifest itself, perhaps. And then you start to also generate some knowledge around this particular a domain in which this particular talent applies to. And then all of that within the right context shows up as a strength. Did I track that correctly? More or less?
Yeah, I think so. It's, an example is, right now we've got the Summer Olympics going, and the
Hmm.
Olympics is essentially a collection of people that have both high levels of talent and have put tons and tons of effort into developing their knowledge and skills. And if you take someone that doesn't have that same level of talent, right, and you do say 10 units of work to develop a particular strength or a particular thing that you're able to do, the person that has the talent will get further with the same amount of work, um, and development, as they'll get further than somebody that has maybe less talent in that area but puts in the same amount of work. And so, the Olympics is really interesting because it's, again, this collection of people that both have high levels of talent and have put in really high levels of work to be
Mhm.
excellent at some very specific thing.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. From your experience, Andy, and just kind of your general read, do you feel like the average person, this is probably a impossible question to answer, but bear with me. Do you feel like the average person is going to just naturally have a pretty good understanding of their strengths, right? Like it just is pretty apparent to them as a person operating in the world? Or do you find that talents or strengths are often hidden unless we do some intentional work around that?
That's a really good question. Um,
I get at least one of those a podcast, so thank you.
well, we used it early. Um, I I think there's some low hanging fruit where we all like to characterize ourselves in a particular way. Um, for example, uh, something like, I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head here. Um, Something like being direct. Like
Hmm.
most people will characterize themselves as being direct because socially that's sort of a positive sounding way to be.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think we like to pick some of those kinds of things and associate ourselves with those because of the social acceptance that comes with, or the perceived social acceptance that comes with being a certain way. Now, as well as I do, that um, not every person who says they're very direct is actually direct. I think it's something everybody says that not everybody actually is. Um,
Guilty.
and so, yeah, and I think most of us are guilty of thinking we're more direct than we are.
Hmm.
Um, but so I think we're kind of in tune with socially what is the way that we want to be or what is the way that we think other people want us to show up. Um, but I've found for myself that when it comes down to really getting into your talent themes of what truly are your strengths, we really get at those so much more when someone holds up the mirror for us. I would say
Hmm.
the things that I've recognized about myself as, my best features or the things that bring the most value to having me around. Those are things that I've been told, maybe not even just once, but it's the patterns of feedback I've gotten from others over time that's really told me and persuaded me that, hey, this is a real thing for me. Um,
Yeah.
so, I think we can get at some things, but when we just try to guess what our strengths are from introspection, I don't think we're great self-evaluators without somebody holding up the mirror, I guess is what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. No, as you say that resonates with me because I'm reflecting on this in real time. But I've had a similar experience to you, it sounds like, where I think if you were to ask me, 5 years ago, what are my strengths, I would probably check off a list of things based on things that I've read in leadership and self development books that are desirable to be. And yet, when people have pointed out, hey, you're really good at this, it often were things that kind of caught me off guard or things I didn't really think about that I was good at it. So let me step back. So are you kind of saying, again, from your perspective, that other people around you might be better equipped to speak to your strengths than maybe you are, in the absence of some intentional development around uncovering your strengths?
Yeah, I think initially, that's probably true. But once you have that assessment of yourself, and again, it's the talent part of it that you need people to really help you see, because the skills, again, you can acquire those and those change over time, but the talents really don't change. Those are just things about you that you have, and they're not going anywhere. Um,
Yeah.
and I think those are the ones that initially, as we develop, especially into adulthood, and kind of become, fully baked, so to speak,
Yeah.
um, that there's a period there where people helping us see the best things in ourselves is really valuable. Um, and then as we get into development of skills and acquiring knowledge and so on, I think we can be a little bit better at being self-aware and being able to speak to our own strengths. But I think to initially identify those talent themes, it really, really helps early in life to have someone hold up that mirror. And I think
Mhm.
that's such an opportunity for managers to do some real good in people's lives, especially for young people. I think young people entering the workforce,
Mm.
there's a fair amount of negativity about, that I hear from managers about, people that are entering the workforce and trying to figure out how do we manage, someone from a different generation. And I think that if managers look at, hey, how do you manage somebody from a different generation that's just kind of entering the workforce or fairly new, to full-time adult employment? Um, One of the best things you can do is to help them figure out what are those talents that they bring, and then help them develop those. Um,
Mhm.
and and so I just think there's so much power to that. And it doesn't even have to just be younger generations. I think any leader can look at the people they lead and make it a priority to help them understand the best things about themselves, because there's a lot of people that have been around for a while that haven't really had that experience with someone where, that
Yeah.
person held up the mirror and said, here's all the best things about you.
Yeah. Okay, let's dig into that just a little bit more. I mean, what benefits might a team or leader expect if they were pretty intentional about helping their team members kind of see their talents or their strengths, right? Like what benefits is this generally going to bring?
A couple of big things come to mind. I I would say one is that uh, people people stick around and do better work and contribute and collaborate and encourage and show up in all these positive ways. People do that so much more when they feel really seen and understood for who they are as a person. And so when you recognize and talk about and get really good at articulating other people's strengths, then they come to work feeling seen and appreciated, as opposed to coming to work and feeling like, hey, all the things that I'm proud of for myself maybe aren't appreciated here. And so I think that it helps improve people's attitudes when they're seen and understood. They don't spend their day being disgruntled about being misunderstood. I think the second big thing would be you can engineer the execution of tasks such that everybody's contributing their best stuff, rather than engineering the execution of collective tasks by just sort of randomly doling things out. uh
Mm.
there's just that added efficiency and quality that comes when you're doing something that comes more naturally to you or something that's a better fit for your strengths, where it would take you twice as long to make something that wasn't quite as good if you were operating in a world where you were competent, but it didn't play to your strengths as much. And
Yeah.
so kind of bringing people in, and getting that attitude where people want to show up and bring their best stuff and recognize other people's best stuff and they feel seen and understood. And then also engineering the actual execution of the work that you do together such that everybody's doing their most efficient, highest quality work as much as possible so that you get that extra something from people.
Yeah. And I would just add to that a level, I mean, I think you can develop a level of understanding, obviously, amongst team members, which can lead to a level of grace that you provide to each other, right? When we recognize, in coming back to kind of almost the start of this episode, when we recognize everything's trade offs, right? Not everybody
Yeah.
is going to have a strength in every area, and their strength may actually show up as a weakness if they're put into a specific context, et cetera, et cetera. But if, like, I understand, for example, that, and actually I'll use myself as an example. It took me a while to understand that I was really not great at brainstorming sessions, right? Because brainstorming sessions is all about just kind of throwing out ideas and kind of inventing things from scratch. And I recognized that I struggled with that because my mind was already moving to, okay, what are the steps that we would need to take to execute on these ideas? Right. And for a
Right.
while, I kind of was, a little bit down on myself. Like I was like stupid or just not creative or something like that. Right. But once I discovered that, and I've been in situations where we're doing brainstorming, and I made that aware to everybody that, hey, look, my strength is actually kind of in the next phase of this type of work, which is in the execution phase. Well, that way, myself and other people can just see me for my strengths that will come later, and nobody's looking at me, or I'm not looking at myself as I'm incompetent in this situation, right? And if we can apply that lens to everybody, that, oh, they're going to shine in certain areas, the areas they might not totally be shining in becomes okay when we have that awareness. I think that's how that might work. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I would add to that is, I am constantly telling people, especially managers, to find ways to express admiration for other people's strengths. And in these kinds of cases, um, a great opportunity to express admiration is when someone's good at something that you're not good at. And I don't mean a skill. I mean something that's like innate, something like being detail oriented. Like I've never seen someone get feedback, you need to be more detail oriented, and then they just were. It's you kind of
Yeah.
are or you're not. And we can talk a little more about how do you navigate a weakness like that in a little bit. But um but the idea is that if you're great at something that I'm not great at, then if I can just acknowledge that and ask you to help me using your strength in some way, right? Like, hey, I'm not good at coming up with all of these with a lot of creative solutions. I'm good at figuring out how to execute something, but you're way better at coming up with creative options. What do you think about this? Or, what are your top 3 ideas for this? And you're not saying the word admiration, but when you tell someone you're good at something that I'm not good at, and I want you to engage with me on that because I want to learn from you or I want to benefit for this thing that you have going for you, it goes such a long way. And again, especially when it's a leader asking someone they lead, right? Like if you ask one of your direct reports, like, hey, I'm not good at this, and this is an area where you are a rock star. Can you please help me, or can you please teach me? Can you, what am I missing here? I think you're probably going to see things that I'm not going to see. When you do that really genuinely, that's what I mean when I tell people to find ways to express admiration for other people's strengths. It goes such a long way.
I mean, that's huge. That's huge. I mean, for building, to use the catchphrase, right? For building psychological safety in your team, right? For the leader to be able to say, "You're better at this than I am," right? that goes such a long ways of just showing that level of humility, right? And what comes with that is also being able to say and have enough courage to say, I am really good at this piece right here. I actually want to handle this piece because I think this plays into my strengths, right? I think you got to be able to do both of those. I think we'll get to talking more about how, maybe how people might be able to go about um, discovering some of their strengths and talents, and how you might be able to help other people discover their strengths and talents. But we've circled around this other piece, which is weaknesses, right?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you from my perspective, and I'm guessing this is what you've seen as well. Most organizations, most teams, explicitly or implicitly, tend to have people focus more on their weaknesses, right? We
Yeah.
do a 360-degree review for a leader. Most 360-degree reviews that I've seen, it says, here are like two of your strengths, and then here's about 10 areas for you to improve in, and your weaknesses, right? And so they kind of disregard the strengths, almost like, hey, well, you're already good at that. Let's disregard that. You're there. Let's focus on a few of these weaknesses. Let's develop these
Hmm.
and this and that. I tend to think that does damage, not only to that person's psyche and morale, but also to the overall performance of that team and of that organization. How do you think about that? How do you think about the balance of focusing on your strengths versus focusing on some of those weaknesses to sharpen them up a bit?
Yeah, this is, I think, so many things about that. I do think that that's been the traditional approach to personal growth is here's what you're good at, here's what you're not good at. Let's work on what you're not good at until you're good at everything is, in a line. Um, and going back to the idea of trade-offs, it's just not realistic to take that approach and expect that people are going to really grow the way they could over time. Um, but there's so many tracks I could go down here. Let me see if I can keep it all straight. First of all, if you're asking someone to work on something that you see as a weakness, then if it's a skill or knowledge, if it's something that can be acquired, I think that's absolutely fair game,
Mhm.
right? It's not what we're not talking about here is saying, "Hey, I'm a terrible listener. That's not a strength that I have, so everybody's just going to have to deal with it." You can't do that.
Right.
Listening is a skill, and you can learn it. Technical knowledge. If you are not performing technically at something in your job the way you need to, somebody's got to provide an opportunity for you to improve in that area. And so I think when we talk about improving things that are seen as weaknesses, we should be talking about skills, which are acquirable, and knowledge. Um,
Hmm.
and sometimes context, right? Like, just is this the right context for you to be working in, or do we need to change things about your job situation, the tasks that you're assigned, the things that you work on, and so on. Um, the What we have to be careful about is asking people to acquire talents, right? Where we just tell people that we want them to um, again, like, be more detail oriented or be more analytical,
Mhm.
or be less analytical, or things like that. Those are the things where we do damage. uh
Yeah.
so there's some of that. um I think negativity bias plays a role here, where if someone's doing great at something, it doesn't really require any action, and it's always going to take more time and energy and focus to handle something that's a problem or that needs to improve or needs to change. That's always going to take more time and energy just to even understand and talk about. And so, that's just the nature of it. If we spend as much time talking about things that went well as things that didn't go well, we wouldn't have any time to do actual work, because if most things weren't going well, we wouldn't be functional. And
Mhm.
so I think remembering um, that negativity bias, that the negative is not only going to pull our attention, but that
Yeah.
problems are going to take more energy to work on than the energy taken to talk about a strength or something that's going well. So there's a couple of things going on there. one more thing. Don't forget that your strengths and your weaknesses are often two sides of the same coin. For example, if you look at my strengths, if you go to my Clifton Strengths profile, then there's some analytical thinking stuff about finding root causes for things, being able to figure out why are things the way that they are, right? And then one of the things that I score really low on is positivity, right? Those are two sides of the same coin. It would be unlikely for me to be able to dig into problems and understand the root cause of why things are the way that they are if I was also shining just a positive light on everything. Those two things are just not going to go together for me. And I'm not saying they wouldn't go together for anyone, but for me, those are two sides of the same coin. The same reason I am analytical and think about problems and causes or root causes are the same things that make me pretty low on positivity. And so when we do these performance evaluations or give feedback, then remembering that whatever you're giving critical feedback about is probably that same thing is responsible for all of their best stuff. Two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, and here's what happens, I think, Andy, is, and again, this is not happening consciously, and so I give all the grace and understanding in the world that this is happening, but, you know, a teammate, a manager will say to somebody, "Hey, Andy, you're extremely analytical, right? And it's really helpful. You're able to kind of really see the issues with things and see the root cause of problems, and that brings a lot of value." And in the same breath, or a week later, they might also say to you, "Gosh, Andy, I just need you to be able to bring some more positivity to the team," right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now I have mixed messages because I'm hearing, okay, well, I need to bring more positivity to the team, yet maybe my, I guess for lack of a better term, lack of positivity is what allows me to identify problems and issues that are so valuable. So it's like, what the hell do
Yeah.
you want here, right? You want both, right? And I would also imagine, let me know what you think about this, that it comes back to context, like you said earlier, right? The context matters, right?
Yeah.
If you are in a situation where kind of positivity is needed right now, right? Maybe morale's a little low. We just went through a really big layoff, for example, that's been hard for the team, right? That might not be the best time for your analytical strength to come into play. And in that situation, you probably do have to temper maybe your um that particular talent so it doesn't show up negatively within that context. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm thinking through this in real time with you.
Yeah. An analogy that I would use is, there's often multiple tools that would be beneficial to a particular job, right? Like empathy and positivity might both be, um, in their own ways, beneficial in a difficult situation. Um, and when we look at our strengths, then we've all got something that can contribute in a meaningful or beneficial way to most situations.
Mhm.
Um, but there's a few things that rise to the top that are so easy to access. And if there's one thing that's true about human beings, it's that if it's convenient, we're going to do it.
Right.
If it's so easy to reach for our maybe one or two top tools that we go to, right? Then we reach for those all the time without recognizing, hey, I've got a couple of tools that are just right behind those, where if I just take a second and I reach for one of those secondary tools that are still strengths that still contribute meaningfully to a given project or situation, I think we have more diverse strength to offer than we think we do. And we just sometimes have to get past those top two or three things that we always go to and move those tools aside and just see that I have a handful of tools behind those that are maybe better to apply in this situation. So rather than saying, hey, I should just be more positive all the time, than saying, hey, I also am pretty empathetic. And so if I can just move the strategic thinking to the side for just a second and use the empathy tool instead, then I've got something that's still very much in my wheelhouse that brings something great to the table that doesn't have that same contradiction that
Yeah.
you were talking about earlier. And so, those secondary strengths that are still strengths, or those secondary talents that are still talents, we just have to move those things that we always go to aside to reach for those. And I think teaching people to do that is a lot more valuable than trying to say, well, acquire this thing that you're very unlikely to acquire.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. I'm also thinking that I mean, this comes back to just some of the benefits of intentionally working to understand your talents, understand your strengths, is because without that type of awareness, you might show up to a situation really flexing your primary talent when that is not the right context in which to flex that talent. And it might be the situation in which, like you were saying, to pull on a secondary talent in the situation. Or with that awareness, exercise some just general self control about how you are going to show up in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's remembering that you have more than one or two tools in your tool bag. Um, like we've got two cars at our house. There's one that we drive most often because, it fits our needs the most. But there are times where it's not the car we should drive somewhere. We should drive the other car because of its capabilities, or, things it can do better. And, maybe that's an unclear analogy, but I think the idea is, remember, like, hey, I have different tools for different things. Don't just go to your favorite tool for everything. Um, and, just like a car can be applicable in a lot of different situations, a particular talent theme that you have can be applicable in a lot of different situations, and you have more than one thing you can reach for.
So switching gears a little bit here, I'm wondering, because this is something I've actually struggled with um a bit lately. I'm wondering, like, how should a leader, a manager, or just a team member in general, right? How should they think about providing feedback in light of recognizing that people have strengths and a strength in a different context could show up as a weakness, right? Because what I'm hearing here is like we kind of want to be careful about what we're giving feedback on. If the thing we're giving feedback on is actually a strength, it's just that we saw it in a context in which it didn't show up as super helpful in that situation. So, like, should we kind of try to, once we understand people's strengths and talents, should we try to kind of avoid giving feedback, like negative feedback that has to do with that strength? Or is there a certain way we might want to approach that so we don't do some damage and undermine that person's talent?
Man, this is a another really good question. So I guess you get to this podcast. Um,
Yes.
I definitely don't think it's a good idea to just not give any critical feedback if it's related to someone's strength. Um, and here's why. Uh, I think that how much we identify with and apply a particular strength in different situations, there's a lot of subjectivity to that. So, for example, if I'm just going to play up this thing of positivity, let's take that one for example. Someone's talent for just having a positive outlook on everything. One of the things that might come with that is saying, hey, everything's going to be fine when everything is not going to be fine unless we
Right.
figure out what the problem is and fix it. And so, if we don't give feedback about impact, then I think we can get into situations where we've kind of built we kind of build a house of cards around people's strengths, where it's like, if this is your strength, then you can never be criticized for applying that strength. And
Mm,
sometimes they're going to bring that hammer and, try to use it on something
yeah.
that's not a nail.
Yeah.
And
Everything starts to look
so
like nails. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so I don't think we want to create fragility around people's strengths, where it's, we'll never criticize you for showing up with your strengths. But I do think that when people's, again, strengths and weaknesses are two sides of the same coin. When someone's showing up and the weakness side of that coin is having an impact, I think we have to be able to talk about that, but to talk about it in the context of strengths and also make the solution strengths focused rather than contradictory, where it's, I keep telling you this is your strength, but now I'm telling you don't do it. I think that when we give that feedback, the feedback is, hey, what the way you're showing up in this situation is having a negative or not so helpful impact.
Mm.
And so let's see what else you've got that might be a better fit for this situation, rather than just saying, be different than who you are in a contradictory way. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. No, and I totally agree with you. I think again, coming back to the benefits of a team together doing some work around understanding each other's talents and strengths is when it does come time to give feedback on a way that talent is showing up that's not super helpful, you can actually acknowledge that. Like it's open, right? You can even say, "Hey, look at your positivity in this situation the other week. It was so helpful in this situation overall. It is a huge asset to this team and brings a lot. And in this situation at our meeting yesterday, when, like we were talking about this existential crisis that we were facing, like that is not when it's super helpful. And so I think, to use a terrible phrase, like you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here, right? Like
Sure.
you want to be able to acknowledge that in a different context this is still helpful, so you don't give the message that just don't be positive, because that's sometimes what people walk away with, right? I think the other thing here is that um again, a benefit to understanding strengths and talents on your team is there actually just might be situations to rearrange someone's job if their talent is working within a context pretty consistently that doesn't let that talent really shine in a positive way, right? If someone has a talent of being extremely like efficient and fast in their communication and they can write pretty good communications efficiently and fast, I don't know if that's a strength or a talent, but just go with me. You know, that might be really great, but if they're also on a daily basis in charge of sending that communication out to their clients and they're just not seeing all the kind of little misspelling errors and things like that, well, can we put somebody else that's very detailed oriented into that workflow process so that person gets to do what they do best, which is put out lots of communication very quickly, and now we have someone else editing. So, I mean, just
Sure.
an example of it might not always be, hey, don't do this anymore. It might just be, well, shoot, you shine here, so let's bring someone else with a different strength to help kind of round this off for us here, right? Like, does that kind of make sense of how you might approach that as opposed to just don't do it here, but do it here?
Yeah, and we also don't always have to bring in somebody else, because I mean, human beings we're all a little sensitive,
Yeah.
and also it's not always practical to say, hey, we're going to have somebody else read all of your outgoing emails before. Like, that feels more punitive than useful, even if it's, on paper it's we're kind of using our strengths in tandem to do something better.
Mhm.
um, but for example, I think that if you can add structure or process that
Mhm.
helps mitigate the weakness. So, for example, you're going to use an electronic spell checker on everything before you send it out. Great. That doesn't require another person. It's just something you could write down and say, hey, here's something I'm adding to my process to help me make sure I catch errors, because I'm not going to read it with that critical eye. But anyone can do a step of, run this through a spell checker before you send it out. Um, or it could even just be that you are fine at catching errors. You just don't think to do one more read through. Maybe the thing is just you're overly confident in your first draft,
Mhm.
right? And so maybe the process isn't adding a spell checker. Maybe the process is, hey, read everything start to finish before you hit send. Once you write it, reread everything. And so adding little steps of process, little steps of structure, I think is a great way to compensate for uh, areas where your weaknesses get in the way.
Yeah.
For example, the analytical thinking, one of the things that I do is I will set timelines for myself where it's, hey, at this point in time, you have to make a choice and go with the best option you've got.
Yeah.
Um, and that helps me not get so bogged down that I don't take action. But it doesn't tell me not to be an analytical thinker. It just tells me, hey, you have this amount of time to do the thinking and get through it, and then go with whatever your best is at that point. And it's something I can hold myself to, but it's a very tangible checkpoint. It's a tangible piece of structure. Um,
Yeah.
and so I find that that's a really useful way for people to do some self-monitoring on um, and self-mitigating on their weaknesses.
Yeah. I think there's some great advice, right? Maybe as a place to start, rather than trying to work on your weaknesses and risk undermining your strengths. First, are there systems that you can set up around yourself or within the team to help mitigate some of that? And I like the example you used, right? I'm going to give myself a deadline. I get to be as analytical as I possibly can for these 4 hours that I have to work on this. And by the end of this, I'm going to make that decision or I'm going to be done with it. I know that in the Clifton Strength Finders that you've referred to already, one of the concepts that stood out to me was when looking at your quote unquote weaknesses, um, do damage control in a sense. Like, work on your weaknesses just enough so they don't undermine your strengths, which is different than saying we really need to focus on your weaknesses here for the next period until your next performance review. It's
Hmm.
like, no, where are just some little tweaks? Don't spend your time and energy focusing on your weaknesses. Just little tweaks, because you really want to spend your time and energy on maximizing your strengths and putting yourself into a position where those strengths can really shine, because that's how you're going to feel most fulfilled as an individual, most engaged, and honestly just contribute to the highest level to the team, and that team's going to be most effective.
Sometimes the phrasing I'll use is, hey, get like 10 to 20% better at that. Anybody can get 10 to 20% better at something, but we're not going to spend our time getting like 80% better at something that just is counter to who we are as a person. So I like that you're saying, like, work on it, but just a little bit. Like, go for the low hanging fruit, the stuff that's easy. Use skills, structures to mitigate, but don't spend all of your time trying to become excellent at everything that you're terrible at. If I spent tons and tons of time and energy trying to be the most positive person in the room, not only would it be weird, but it just wouldn't work.
Well, Andy, I'm curious. Maybe this is where we'll finish up today. We can look at this out on an individual level or a group level, but where might somebody start with this? Kind of coming full circle, right? We don't always recognize in ourselves our talents. There needs to be a mirror held up to you in some way or form. How can we go about starting to learn about our talents and the talents of those around us?
Yeah, I think the first thing we need is language. Like,
Mm,
we need language to articulate um kind of this world of strengths. Uh and the Clifton Strengths assessment is great as far as assessments go, but I also think that even if you didn't take the assessment, if you just went and read through some of these descriptions of, what are these 34 talent themes, these innate things that people have, uh, there's so much value in just having language for something. And, in the same way that, like, when we talk about emotional intelligence and labeling emotion, just having a word to describe your emotional experience does a lot of good, just having the word for it.
yeah.
And I think in a similar way with describing strengths and talents, just find the vocabulary, find the words, um, to be able to have conversations about this with people. Um, and so that's a great starting point. I'm curious, what have you found useful for yourself or for others that you've worked with as a place to start discovering?
Yeah, I like the Clifton Strength Finder as well, at least as a starting point. And we'll link to that in the show notes because I think it can be useful, especially around, like you were saying, maybe establishing a common vocabulary around talents and strengths, right? I think the thing you want to be careful about with that, with any kind of assessment that's similar to that, is right. It's not a fortune cookie, right? It
Yeah.
it provided me some clues. It provided me some clues to explore, to look into. Does this work for me? Does this make sense for me? Et cetera, et cetera. So I find that a really good starting point. But honestly, I find that having a few lenses to look at yourself throughout the course of a day, week, month, or year is really helpful, because it really is a long discovery process. I really don't think it's take an assessment and now you're all good. Here are your strengths. I think you need to be thinking about things like, for example, where do I tend to just naturally get really inquisitive and curious about on my day to day tasks, right? Where do I just naturally tend to gravitate to? What are the type of things I tend to just kind of get lost in, where time just seems to go by extremely quickly, right? That might be an indicator of a talent that you're exercising there. What are some things that I tend to just learn really quickly or rapidly? Like if I'm learning it, I tend to skip steps. I tend to learn it quicker than other people, right? That might be an indicator of some of the talents around that. So some of these type of prompts I like to look for. Um, Also, just asking the people that you interact with or work with most often, right? Questions
Yeah.
like, where do you see me at my best? Where do you see me contributing to this team in the most impactful ways? Where do you see me most helpful in our family here, right? And everything we're trying to get done. So, things like that can be helpful. And I don't know, do you have some of those similar lenses that people might try on to discover some of their strengths?
Um, yeah, I think paying a lot of attention to patterns. Um, so ideally, perfect world is you take, 3 or 4 different assessments, whether it's, Clifton Strengths, DISC, the Enneagram. I mean, there's a dozens and dozens of these out there.
Yep.
And look for patterns across different assessment perspectives. But in that same way, you can look for patterns across anything else too. Like if you really, really listen to the feedback that you get from people, then
Mm.
over the course of, say, a year, you're probably going to string a few things together and say, okay, this is the thing. I keep hearing about this thing. There's probably something there. Let me go and ask some others that I trust, saying, hey, I'm seeing this pattern in feedback that I get. Can you help me understand that better? I think it's really hard for people to respond to general questions sometimes, in terms of feedback. Um, but if you go with sort of a target for them to shoot at and say, hey, I'm recognizing this pattern. Um, what do you see in this specific area? What can you teach me about myself? I find that goes a really long way. It helps them kind of get a start on it, because honestly, most people probably haven't thought about you in depth and thought about, what are your talents and your strengths, and not. They probably haven't formally done that. But if I go to you and say, like, hey, I've been getting feedback that I'm showing up in this way, um, I'm trying to wrap my head around it. What can you tell me from your perspective? Then people are more likely to have something really meaningful where they actually can hold up a clearer mirror. That's not easy to say. A clearer mirror.
Clearer
Uh,
mirror.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
those patterns are probably the most valuable thing to look at. Whether it's your own assessment of your patterns or asking other people's assessment of your patterns, it's all about patterns, because again, your strengths or your talents are the things that you really can't help but do.
Yeah.
And so they're going to show up consistently. And so if you can see what's showing up consistently, then you're really going to get somewhere.
Absolutely. I like that last piece, the things that you can't help but do, right? I can't help but look at a situation and see
Yeah,
the issues with it, for example, right? And that can be really valuable in a certain context.
sure.
I can't help but just look at the bright side of things when a situation is going wrong, right? There's a talent there,
Right.
right? I think that's really important. Now, if we take this from just again a manager's perspective that's really committed to developing their team, their employees, right? There's probably some really good questions that you can start asking your employees to help them start discover that to help you and them start discovering their talents. And they might be similar. It might be like, hey, where do you tend to find the most energy in the work? Like, what's the type of stuff that really gets you excited that you do, that
Hmm.
you seem to get lost in? That's a really good question. And then you might also ask, what tends to drain your energy, right? Because by looking at that, it can also look at, help you understand, some other clues around strengths and talents, right?
And it's not always pleasant. Like sometimes the things that you're good at and the things you get lost in are actually tasks that you hate or that
Mm,
would be miserable for anyone. Um,
yeah.
but I do think that I'm kind of in the camp of you don't have to be, you know, passionately excited about everything you do for work.
Hmm.
Sometimes the satisfaction of, this task in and of itself, I don't really love doing it. I don't look forward to doing it, but I'm really good at it. And there's some satisfaction that comes from being good at something.
Yeah.
Um, and so, we don't have to have everything around something in order for it to be a meaningful application for our strengths. Um, can I do one little soapbox here that's
Please
really really
step up
important
on
to
the
me?
soapbox.
Um, as you learn what your strengths are, you can weaponize anything, right? Do of resist the temptation or the tendency, rather, to weaponize your strengths. So, for example, if I am let's stick with this strategic or analytical thinking piece, right? If we all sort of know that that's my strength, and then I weaponize that during, uh, say, group decision making discussions, we're trying to be collaborative, and then I play that card and I say, well, we all know that I'm the most analytical thinker. I've thought this through the most, and I start leveraging that to try to get my way. And especially when I pit that against, like, hey, look, we all know you're not the most detail oriented person, and I'm very detail oriented. So maybe we should go my way on this.
Right.
You have to be so careful about weaponizing your strengths in that way. Um, the other caveat, again, you cannot just say, well, this is what I'm good at and this is what I'm not good at, and then just tell everybody else to deal with it.
Right.
And you can't do it once. You can't be apologetic once, and say, hey, I know I'm not the most empathetic person. I'm sorry if that ever gives you bad feelings. And then never talk about it again. You have to consistently mitigate the impact of your weaknesses once you know they're there. You have to apologize way more than you think. You have to acknowledge the impact your weaknesses have had on others way
Mhm.
more than you think. You can't just, once a year be like, hey, yep, I sent off those hasty emails that I didn't reread and they sounded terrible on your end. Sorry, I did that 100 times this year. See ya, same time, same place next year. It's like, no, you have to do it along the way. It's kind of like having a car that pulls to the right. You can't just correct it once every 20 miles. You have to constantly be kind of pulling that steering wheel back um, to get the car to go straight. And so I think that recalibration, that constantly being aware of your impact, and then finding ways to develop skills or to use other strengths that you have to mitigate that negative impact, I think is really important. I, you know, um, we started talking about kind of the idea that we don't focus on strengths, but I think you can also go way too far the other direction and only focus on strengths and completely ignore the impact of your weaknesses. And I think it's not meeting in the middle, but it's doing both, where we focus on our strengths and we also are hyper focused on the impact that we have so that we can use processes, structures, skills, other people's strengths, other strengths of ours to mitigate the impact of those things that we can't help but do, because there is an impact. So there's my soapbox over. Um,
Yeah.
but that's important because I've seen so many people miss the mark on that, especially leaders, especially executives. And that's really important to understand. It really wreaks havoc if you don't.
Mm. Amen, brother. I would just say let's leave it there, because I concur with everything you just said. It lands with me. It resonates with me. And thanks, Andy, for this cool conversation. I learned some new things for sure, and some new ways of kind of looking at this. Andy, where could people learn more about you, find you? Are you on the intranets anywhere?
I am on the internet. So if you want to learn more about me and the things I'm doing, you can go to my podcast, which is called the Lead Forward Podcast. Very short episodes, little snippets. Most of them are just me. And so we talk about some of these similar types of concepts. I talk way less on those than I did on this. I would say my strength with you, Ethan, in particular, is I'm very capable of talking a lot when you and I get together.
I've noticed. It's fun.
Yeah. So the Lead Forward Podcast or leadforwardco.com, you can find all of my info and other content.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. And I will link to all of that in the show notes for you all. Besides that, once again, Andy, thanks for coming back on the podcast. I'm looking forward to the next time that you get to come on. And take care, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, folks, wait. Don't go yet. Please, stay with me for 1 second here. I want to let you know about a couple cool little goodies that we have available for you. If you dig this podcast, you will probably also dig our Managing with Mind and Heart newsletter. This is a monthly newsletter where we share articles that we write about, hey, how to thrive as a manager, how to lead teams that are characterized by high morale, engagement, psychological safety, care and respect, collaboration, and high performance. You can sign up for this newsletter by texting the word leading to the number 66866. Additionally, you can go to our website and sign up for the newsletter there. Our website is www.nashconsulting.com. And of course, if you're not already aware, we have our cornerstone program for leaders and managers, and it is called Managing with Mind and Heart. Go figure. This program is something that we often bring into organizations to work with all their leaders on helping them get aligned and singing off the same sheet of music with best practice management skills and behaviors. We've brought this to hundreds of organizations at this point with really good results. And if you are not able or inclined to bring our program in-house, twice a year, in the spring and in the fall, we offer this 6-day Managing with Mind and Heart leadership development program online for anybody that would like to sign up and join us. To learn more about this online course and to register, you can go to our website. Once again, that's nashconsulting.com. Or send us an email at contact@nashconsulting.com. All right, that's all. That's it. See you later. Bye.